everyone, and welcome to another Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. I'm Will Schick, Director of Product Development for Atomic Mass Games, and today we're going to be painting the one and only, the White Queen, aka Emma Frost, aka Headmistress of the new Xavier Institute, aka many other things, Hellfire Club Mistress, all kinds of good stuff. We've got two minis to paint today. I'm going to focus mostly, I think, on the diamond form version, because I think that one will be fun. We'll kind of go through my approach to painting the diamond style skin, where we get to use some blues and try to make it look a little gemstone-y. And of course, we're going to be painting some white because the White Queen. I thought I might cheat out and be like, well, the Black Queen will paint her black, but we're going to do white. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and just jump right into the miniature. So we have here the Diamond Transformation White Queen. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but one of the cool things that the sculpting and engineering team did is you'll notice that when you look at the two different Emma Frosts, you're going to see all these like really sharp gemstone-y kind of like facets on the diamond version. So you can kind of see like these little facets here and stuff. And so that'll make painting. It gives us kind of a roadmap for the different effects and everything. And then of course here is the normal transformed version. And she has a little bit of schmutz on her that I missed, but that's okay. I'll fix that right now. But she, of course, has the smooth, nice style skin. All right. This shirt, I think I just got this shirt from somewhere. I think this one was just a random pickup from a clothing store, like just any old place. A lot of my shirts come from a couple different online places like T-Turtle and stuff. But I think this one I just found at a random like department store, and I was like, sweet, I need this. All right, so we're just gonna start off with our whites. I'm gonna mix in kind of a shade color here. And we're gonna be doing, because we're gonna do that blue diamond skin, I want kind of like a bluish tinge to my white. So this little mixture of Purity White, what do we got on the palette? Arctic Blue, Miskatonic Gray, Blanco, or just plain old white. I think there's some Leandris Gray in there as well. Are these little colors right here, and then we got a lot of different blues for our gemstone effects, so we're just gonna mess around with that and see how it goes. All right. Add a little bit more water because that's a little thick. And we want this to be pretty smooth. So let's kind of like wash this down, and I think we're gonna have to go a little darker. That's okay. So again, just starting over our Zenith Prime. Add a bit more gray in there. Just kind of like tinge this down a bit more. So we'll just work at it. Kind of knock this out. And of course, if you missed it, because you just woke up, you're just joining us today, who knows? I don't know what your day's like or what you've been doing. The panel to play for Emma Frost did go up today, this morning, around 10 a.m., 11 a.m., something like that. I don't know. I got out of my morning meetings and saw it was there and it was up. So if you want to know what this badass does in Marvel Crisis Protocol, between her two transformation abilities and all that stuff, you can go check that out on the Atomic Mass Games website. I'm sure you can find the link to the, oh my gosh. Summer, why is this palette cam literally in my way? You just made me throw. No, you leave it right there. I'll just avoid like ramming my hand in it absentmindedly and putting my thing everywhere. But yeah, developing and designing this character was a lot of fun. We originally started out with the idea that her diamond transformation was going to be more like Vision's phasing. So if you've ever played with Vision, or the newer Red Skull, Master of Hydra, with the little selectable armor. Are you just throwing stuff over there too now? In the world, girl. And it was just going to be a token, and it was going to kind of like shift back and forth. But as we kind of got into the process and stuff, realized that there were a lot of things that I wanted to see represented between the two different forms, and it was going to take a bit more. Oh, it's too much black. That's okay. We'll just work it out. I just want a little bit. I want a little more shade here. That's all. But it was going to be too much to do with just the token effect, and so kind of IM'd Marco, our sculpting manager, and looped into Dallas and was like, hey, I know we said that we probably weren't going to do transformation for Emma, but what if we did? Could we get another Emma Frost? And they, of course, were all into the idea, so we added the transformed version of Emma, and that's where we got all of the cool like gemstone effects and everything that they pulled together, which was really fun on this version that we're painting right here. So it wasn't the original plan, but a lot of the times, you know, one of the nice things about having a bit longer of a lead time and thinking about this stuff ahead of time, smooch on my brush, is that we can do a little bit of adjustment, not a lot, but a little bit from time to time. You can definitely come in there and do some neater stuff, some cool things. We leave some time into our schedule for R&D and shifting things up. Yeah, the cape design on this, it's got that nice Dave Kidd style cloth, really nice sharp angles. If you wanted to do this in a wash, it would definitely take like your contrast washes or like that pretty well. You can airbrush it pretty good. So add a little bit more of this Leander's gray in there. Darken all this up. So I'm just looking to get my real strong shadows in first, and then we'll build up from there. And if we need to, we can always go back and kind of knock in more shades. But as we've discussed before, when you're painting white, you're always looking at the shadows of white. So the shadow that you get into the white is the most important part. And you can do a lot of different colors with the shadows and stuff. So you can always use blues like I'm doing here, kind of like blues and lavenders. We could go with magentas, you can do greens, you can do literally any color. It all kind of changes the tone and the story of the piece and the overall look. But ultimately, you just want to make sure that you're defining those volumes and you're defining them mostly through your shadows. So I'm going to grab my second brush here so I can blend out some of these deeper shadow recesses. Just kind of smooth and blend around the edges. But the nice thing about the style of cloth and stuff is that we have these nice, really sharp defined folds and creases, so it makes knowing where to place those deeper shadows pretty easy and effective. And then when we go back in and we add our next stages of highlights and stuff, we'll really pull that together and make it look nice and neat. Get in here. Creases around the legs and the undersides of the thighs and all that stuff where we're not going to get a lot of light. You can really push those shadows and shades. Like I said, we can always come back and highlight those up later too. Video games inspired. Yeah, so I mean, we've talked a lot, I think, in various places about inspiration for Crisis Protocol, and I've always been a huge fan of fighting games. So, you know, all the classic like arcade cabinet fighting games, anything with a combo meter has always kind of had an allure to me. I'm not very good at them, but I really like them. And some of that stuff really came out in Crisis Protocol. You know, think about big superhero smackdowns and throwdowns. There's a lot of fighting game element to them. So there's, even in the comics and the stories, right? What you're really focusing on is this big climactic battle between two or more really powerful characters, but those moments that really stand out are the one-on-ones. You know, even in the big group battles, you think about the big mashup in the very first Civil War storyline, right? The iconic panel of that is all these heroes kind of pairing up around Iron Man and Captain America, who are dueling individually in the center of the whole mess, right? You have Iron Man shooting his repulsors into Cap's shield, and the repulsor beams going everywhere. Like, that's, for a big old group throwdown, there's a very big center, there's a very big focus on the individual characters, because that's where the story is, that's where the drama is. And so, like, kind of naturally going to that level of fighting games and everything, it made that a really great, I think, and an easy interpretation and inspiration for some of the concepts. So obviously you have power, which is very is kind of the interpretation, is their interpretation of a character's like fighting meter or their power meter in a lot of like contemporary fighting games, where you want to build that meter, and the higher you build the meter, you know, the more explosive, powerful attacks you can do, kind of unlocks your super specials, as it were. And so that was one of the really big kind of influences for me, was getting that idea that it's exciting, and part of the strategy in those fighting games is learning how to, you know, really utilize that resource to manipulate that meter in the best way possible, when to use your biggest abilities, when not to. And of course, those elements can be used for defense just as much as for attack with certain characters and everything. So that was a big one. You know, there's a little bit of Ultimate Alliance in there. Who didn't love, or still doesn't love, Ultimate Alliance, right? Probably the most iconic of the Marvel superhero team-up games, where you can just really live your biggest superhero fantasies when it comes to like who you want to see on a team together. And I always like the system of soft benefits and the team-up effects, very much reminiscent of the team tactic cards. So there's a lot of outside, you know, game systems, especially in the video game kind of like ecosphere, that had big impacts on some of the design direction and decisions, and inspired a lot of tabletop rules that came along with it, for sure. It's, you know, it's pretty amazing to me how great every time they do a Lego game interpretation. Those are pretty solid, for sure. But yeah, it's, you know, it's, you, when you're creating anything, I think, you use all of the inspiration of things that really excite you, or motivate you, or, you know, things that you like, right? Because at the end of the day, your first goal is to please yourself. Because if you don't like it, then how can you expect anyone else to like it, you know? And then the next step is, okay, I like it, but do other people have the opportunity or the inclination to like it as well? Because, well, self-creation, or creating for one's own desires and wants, is perfectly fine and dandy. It doesn't make for a great for a great long-term business strategy. And honestly, you know, even if you think it's the best game ever, if no one wants to play it with you, playing games by yourself is not typically a great, you know, benefit or desire in the tabletop. Like, we play tabletop games mostly to play with each other and to play in social settings and with people. So you have that balance of, okay, I like this, I think it's good, other people have really identified and liked it. And maybe, you know, not everyone likes everything or the same things, but that's okay, because these games are nuanced enough and deep enough that there's lots of things that some people will like, and they'll take everything away differently, and I think that's really fun too. And part of what makes the process so neat and interesting and enjoyable is what Pagani brings to the table, and what he's looking for is different from what I'm looking for, what Rowan is looking for, right? We're connected in a lot of ways in certain aspects, and we have kind of that common shared language of the game, and this might be a little too bright, but we'll see. Yeah, I want to darken that up just a little bit. Too bright. But then what happens is, you know, everyone comes in and they kind of use that shared language, and you start working together and building things that hit different aspects or elements, and that's what also makes a really strong and nuanced game environment. Blend that out, get around these edges. But yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom, obviously fantastic, great stuff. Take some elements from that, some of the team ups and everything, but it was all about like identifying really early on that if superheroes fighting is what the game's supposed to be about, there's not too many other expressions out there that kind of showcase that better than just classic old fighting games. I'm showing those iconic kind of battles and duels and stuff. Airbrush question using inks, any do's and don'ts? Really, so in my experience, you know, most inks are a joy to work with through the airbrush because they're already thin enough that you don't really have to do a whole lot of like worrying about thinning them properly for applications and everything. You definitely want to watch your airbrush PSI, right? They're going to come out pretty quick because they're so thin. So you may want to be careful about what your overall air pressure is so that they don't like spray out right away. Absolutely need to be aware of and careful with your trigger control so that you don't expel a ridiculous amount of ink in one go, because it's going to come out really quick, really easy. And then you're going to have to be pretty aware of your distance with the airbrush to the miniature itself, because again, because they're so thin and they spray so well, if you're not watching your trigger control and your PSI and all of that other stuff, you can get spider webbing pretty quick. So, you know, it won't dry quite as well or as quickly. And then it'll spritz out and it'll spider web on you, and it'll look kind of gross and bad. And that can be difficult to fix easily. So always test out kind of your distance, like do a couple of practice runs just to learn how the ink kind of responds to your setup and get your distances kind of nailed down and stuff before you go through and hit the thing that you want to. But overall, I really like doing inks through the airbrush almost more than any other paints. And you know, same kind of general rules for inks and airbrushes in general apply. So remember that you're not trying to get one solid coat done in one go. You want to build up those layers slowly, and especially with inks, you want to do it over the course of probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 applications. And as long as you kind of take it slow and don't try to rush through it, you know, I think you'll find that ink airbrushing can be a really excellent tool. And honestly, you might find that you just want to do nothing but inks through the airbrush if you can help it, because again, it's just it's a really solid experience. So I'm just kind of using my highlight here, building up the areas where I want more of the light, more of the white, using that secondary brush to kind of blend out the transitions between the two. And I don't need this color everywhere because the shadow is what's really going to define my white. The highlight of pure white can be just a small amount. If you go look at, you know, really great painters, go look at great artistic oil canvases and stuff where they use a lot of white, they use almost no white at all. It's always like, you know, yellows and purples and blues, heavily desaturated a lot of times with, you know, with a white mixture, but pure white itself is just like the tippiest highlight. And your eye, because as Dallas always likes to point out, go look at a white wall really close in the real world and you'll notice that there's not a whole lot of white there. Pure white isn't a thing that we see a lot because it's always tainted by the light source around it. It's tainted by dirt and grime and grunge. So it only takes that barest touch, that hint of pure white to make our eyes see white, to make our brains read what we're looking at as, oh, that's white. So that's why getting those shadows is so much more important. 2 years for an MCP character. Okay, let's see. This is a long one. I'm going to read it while I load up my brush. Now, I've said that the product dev cycle is about 2 years for an MCP character. That means how do the CP numbers get assigned? Yeah, so how do the CP numbers get assigned? Basically, the second that a product is concepted, so we decide that this is a thing that we think we want to make someday, it gets a CP number. So that step really happens well before a lot of things, like, and it's why you'll see CP numbers don't go sequentially. It'd be great if they did. I think it would, you know, it'd be a lot easier on everybody internally if it just worked out that way. But it doesn't, and there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, you have things like a pandemic that suddenly interrupts kind of your schedule. You have sculptors or artists who fall a little behind, or maybe there's some real world events that kind of change your mind on how things should go or what's more timely to release, that kind of stuff. So, in the end, the CP number is there as a quick search resource. It's there as a SKU find, and it's used internally for a lot of things. And then obviously at the retail level, it's used for ordering and inventorying and all of that. But it's not really an indication of release order, right? So it's interesting, and it's kind of been funny to watch for a long, long time about people try to figure out, oh, well, these SKUs are missing and this thing's here. And the fact of the matter is that, yeah, there's no missing SKUs. They all exist. You just may not know about them externally yet. They may not be announced. They may not be announced for, years yet. Because sometimes you go through and you do this big batch of, okay, here's all the things we want to hit. We're all agreed that we're going to hit them. But that doesn't mean that they go on the release calendar in that way or in that order. It doesn't mean they get assigned that way. So it's not really a statement of intent when it comes to cadence or order. It's simply this thing's going to happen at some point. We've all agreed that it's going to happen. It's on the schedule, quote unquote, but that doesn't mean that it's on the release schedule. And again, that stuff will, let's see if I can do this without getting my shoulder in the way, so kind of see what's going on a little bit better. It's because I paint with my right hand. I really want to pull it away from the camera, and I know that's not the most exciting thing, so I'm going to try to work on it for you. I'll work at a disadvantage here a little bit, so that maybe you can see what I'm doing for once. So the technique that I'm using right now is probably one of the most basic or more basic techniques that I see used a lot. So this is just layering. So all I'm doing is layering the paint, and I'm using thin coats and then building my colors up over time. And this is really, it's great for all colors, but it's really useful for colors that are really chunky and don't go on smooth. So white is notorious for being a difficult color to use and get smooth application on because the pigment is just gross and there aren't very many smooth applying whites out there. So to really save you in terms of like your smoothness, I'm doing a 2-brush blend application, which I've learned from Dallas, and I still continue to work on to try to master. I'm nowhere near as efficient or as good at it as he is. Where after I apply my thin layer, I'm using that secondary brush to kind of like feather out or blend out the edges between my two previous colors. And so this saves me a little bit on the layering, but it also makes those blends a little smoother. And it's really just a question of taking a slightly damp, clean secondary brush and then smoothing or blending the colors out. So just like you would blend it on a palette or mix the colors together, that's what you're doing here. And those thin layers, because they're translucent, kind of create transparency layers, and then it causes those two different, very strongly different color zones to blend together nicely. Because the more you pull the paint and the more you thin out the paint, the more transparent it gets, the lower the opacity, so it becomes more like a layer of film, and that really allows you to create really nice, smooth blends. But even without that second brush kind of helping me cheat a little bit, and I put cheat in quotes, just kind of speeding up the process. Doing the layering process like this is, you'll see, so many great and amazing tutorial resources out there on YouTube and in the communities and stuff. I just play pretend. I like to be the blue collar example of somebody who's still very much learning this. I don't paint professionally for a living. I get to come on and do it during these streams, and I do it as a hobby at home and everything, but really I'm by no means a master of any of these techniques or proficient at many of them. I just kind of know enough to be dangerous, and so we like to have Dallas come on, and he can really dive in as a industry award-winning painter and professional who's painted studio miniatures for years and everything. He can come on and he can give you all of like the really amazing, awesome like pro tips and techniques and tools, and then I get to come on here and just hang out and kind of show you that very few people in the world are Dallas. So, we're all just learning. We're all on a journey and we're all figuring it out. And that's perfectly fine. So, hopefully, as you see me muddle through this stuff, you can take some inspiration or like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm going to learn more about this or see it in application. I know one of the things that definitely always frustrated me originally was just watching somebody do something, and when the teacher shows it to you and they just do it perfect because they've been doing it forever, it's like, man, why isn't this easier for me? Why can't I do it? I keep messing it up. And it's like, yeah, because you're learning it. That's literally the whole point. You got to screw it up about 500 times before you learn it. And you're just going to refine and get better because it's technique. So it's not even something that you can really learn. Ultimately, all this stuff, you just practice at it and you develop your own style and your own technique. Like hitting a baseball. There's elements to batting in baseball that, they're consistent throughout. And they're things, if you want to be a successful hitter, you have to do. But when it comes down to how you apply them, your style at the plate, how you do your stance, all that stuff, like that's so personal. It's as much your art as it is anyone else. And trying to completely mimic somebody's style at the plate, it's just not going to work for you, They're finding their own like groove, their own feel. How I like to hold the brush, how my height and my body shape impact how I can get to the miniature easy. Like all that stuff really comes into play. And it means that the exact way in which I do something or apply something is going to be very different from the way someone else is going to do it. Because like I don't like painting this way. It's really hard for me to paint this way because I want to go this way. My natural stroke is this way. So everything I'll do with the Mini, if I can, is to make it so that I can do the brush stroke this way. And if I do that, I get the best results. And other people will have different things and different ways to go about it. So, all right. Well, I'm pretty happy with where our white is right now. I think we're looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and get some blue on there and get going. So we're going to start with a bit of this, a bit of that, mix it a little black. So we go pretty kind of dark here. You moved your camera, now you can't see my palette.
I know.
What's wrong with you, lady? Here, I'll move the palette. But then I'm moving it back because this is too far away from me.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start with this. Okay. So this is going to be our really deep color, and then we'll just kind of build it up from there. Okay. So I'm applying a bit of a wash here. So I'm going to use that zenith highlight just to kind of make this a little easier, tinge our color, and this will allow us to go in and I want to be careful here because I'd prefer not to get it on all the white I just worked on, if I can help it. Coming over here. Kind of this out. Oh, if you could meet one character you guys have released for MCP, who would it be and why? Assuming they were real. Ooh. That's a tough question. We've released so many cool characters. I mean, I'd probably just have to go with Spider-Man. He's like, Peter Parker's my go-to ultimate favorite. And I think it would just be fascinating to get to hang out with him for a day. And maybe go web swinging. Because that'd be pretty neat. I would like that a lot. So I think Peter Parker would be the one that I'd want to meet, like, personally, and just, you know, like if I was gonna hang out with somebody for the day, I think Peter Parker would be a pretty neat one to do, because it would be, you know, he's funny, and he's a pretty down-to-earth dude, and I think that he's, you know, you can learn as much from his mistakes and his choices that I don't always agree with in terms of how he lives his life, but I think that's the point. As you can from the things that he does well and does right. Honestly, if I was going to go to like a lecture though, like a talk, if a character was going to give some kind of like dissertation, I think I would probably I'd want to spend the day in like the Captain America classroom. Like, I think listening to Steve Rogers talk about morality, right, wrong choices, would be a blast. I would love to be able to sit in a class and kind of throw out moral challenges or questions about what Steve Rogers thinks people should do in certain situations. Kind of be like getting to talk to Thomas Paine or some of those other founders, those old school patriots. But there's so many fun, like there'd be so many fun characters. It'd be really difficult to have to just narrow it down to one. I mean, you know you'd have a great time with Tony Stark. You'd get to go anywhere, do anything. High roller Tony. I don't really think I'd want anything to do with Hank Pym, to be honest. He just doesn't seem like he'd be that exciting. But I'm also not like a super big science person, so, you know. I'd be like, let's go do something. You'd be like, nah, let's look at these ants. I'd be like, no thanks. Does she lose condition from her side when she goes to diamond? Yep, when a character gains immunities to something, they lose the conditions. So, I'm fairly like 95% confident that the core rulebook wording covers that exact instance, but if it doesn't, I'm also 95% confident that somebody asked that question once in the rules forum. And that was the agreed upon situation. Okay, let's go and grab some of this blue. Start mixing things up. And like kind of getting back to the Emma Frost discussion, you know, we talked about how she originally wasn't going to be a transforming character and the diamond form was going to be a bit more like Vision's phasing, but then we kind of shifted our thought process on that and changed our mind. And one of the real big facets of that was, you know, the fact that we wanted. I kind of fell in love with the idea that, you know, one of the things after doing some additional readings on Emma Frost and everything was that she can go into this really impervious diamond form and it's all great for her, and she becomes immune to like all this stuff, but she doesn't like it. It severs her off from her telepathy and her main powers. And I thought the duality of that and representing that in transforming character, which transforming characters are, they're always very much centered on the idea that you're getting, you as a player are gaining these benefits. But in order to gain those benefits, you're making sacrifices somewhere else, right? So the very first transforming characters represented this Ant-Man and Wasp in that when you're tiny, you become a lot more difficult to damage, and you're typically faster, or, you get the ability to be able to like punch really hard or anything like that. But the trade-off is that all of a sudden you can't carry objective tokens. And so when do you want to use that? In what situations is that better for you? What team compositions can make that like really good use of that, all that stuff. With Emma, it was really fascinating to me to be like, okay, well, she can do this whenever she wants. And there are times where like you really want to do it, but then the penalty for it is that she gets kind of trapped in her diamond form, and you lose access to all these other great things that she has. So, you lose her psychic defenses, and you lose the ability to kind of protect your team, and you lose the ability to shut down opposing characters with her innate ability that turns off their reactive superpowers and stuff. It's like, how does that interplay in? How does that affect things? And not giving the players the freedom of choice like some of the transforming characters have, to just be able to spend power to like snap back and forth whenever it's convenient for them and stuff, but instead to hard bake in this kind of fixed time window, this cooldown period where it's like, okay, you're going to go into diamond. That's fine, but now you're going to be stuck in that diamond form for X amount of time. Use it when it's most... use it when you think you have to, or when it's going to be beneficial to you. But be careful, because you're making this choice. A little too excited there. That became something that I really became enamored with from again, you kind of start with the things that you really like. I love puzzles like that. I like situations that are never optimal, and so you have to be clever, or you have to figure out what the optimal solution to that is. And it allowed us a lot more freedom and flexibility to kind of like amp up Emma in certain ways. And you kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, if this character just had this all the time, it'd be kind of bonkers. But there's significant drawbacks every time you decide to go in there and mess around with it, because your opponent now doesn't have to worry about what you're going to do. Your play, your options are telegraphed, right? And I think one of the really strong and interesting things about Crisis Protocol, and as you get into playing, is that your ability to somewhat outthink your opponent, or to pose dynamic and kinetic, interesting puzzles to your opponent, and that they never quite know exactly what you're going to do, is part of what makes a really strong player. And so Emma sacrifices a bit of that when she decides to use some of her abilities, because she's going to be in that diamond form until the end of her next activation, which means that, guess what, you're not going to use for a whole round, or at least until her next activation. You're not going to be able to use all those sweet psychic defenses, and you're not going to be able to use her psychic attacks when she activates and things like that. So it became a really interesting balance point, and she was the subject of many a playtest and playtest conversations, both internally, externally. It took a lot of time to get that balance right, to where, transforming wasn't so much of a negative that you just never did it. Because that's also never good, right? It's okay if a character doesn't use all their stuff all the time or even in every game, but you want the idea of using it to absolutely be a valid option the majority of the time. And so it was a unique challenge. And we went through a lot of different iterations of like how penalizing was the transformation? How long did it last? When could you get it back? When could you choose to do it? And each one of those had an impact on her balance and the way in which she functioned, and it took a while before we wound up at a situation where we were all pretty happy and the testers were happy and she was kind of functioning the way we wanted. And she felt very, very Emma Frost, very White Queen. And that was an exciting time. It was fun. It was a very fun challenge. And every transforming character I think really has been. But it's part of why, every time we do them, they always feel a little more special. It's just like that. It's just that extra level of challenge in trying to get them right, and how you get to be a little different with them. That makes it so fun. And in challenge, you get that reward where when you come out the other side after driving one Sarah Ronan to insanity with the numerous iterations and changes and people being like, this just doesn't feel right, or this course feels wrong, it doesn't work. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to stick with it because we have the time, we can do it. Let's make it happen. Let's think our way out of this box. It's great. I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of really smart and talented people. And everybody kind of comes together and figures it out, And everyone's critically minded enough to be able to recognize when things aren't quite working or they're not going to work, and then we come up with creative solutions the other way. All right, so we're just getting that hair kind of edge highlighted here with our white. Go one more level with our white. So I mean, the big thing with the hair is just going to be like going in, and the more contrast you give it. So we're probably going to do like a quick controlled blue wash. It's about giving it that little bit of glint and sparkle, but the contrast is really what sells gem effects. So kind of look at those classic how to paint like a jewel. In miniature, where you start with like almost a black version of your jewel color. It's like a black red or a black blue, and then you do, half the so you paint all of it in the black color, and then you go in and you do half the, oh gosh, brush got away from me. Look, we'll just clean it right up, and you do half of the gem, from the bottom half in like the base color, and then you mix in a brighter color and you do half of the half, and then you do another half of the half, and you just kind of crescent moon it all the way down. Same idea here with the hair. Of course, you're not working with like quite as simple of a shape, but the more we push in those shadows and those shades, which we can do the more gemmy it'll look. But you just want those little ping reflections, those little spots, those glints, and that will help the light read as if it's like bouncing and refracting off of the surface. And then it's all about just pushing that contrast down. But what we're really missing here is we need to go back to that shadow and shade, and we need to get some deeper blue colors in, and so we'll do that here in a second. We'll see how that kind of pushes this look to the next level. But I can be pretty aggressive here with my highlights if I know I'm going to go back in and do some shade washes, because I can always bring these colors down. Do like a couple right there. Okay, so now I just need my intense cyan, sure. Take a little bit of cyan. I want a little bit of Tesla blue. I feel like I had some Inktense blue somewhere, but whatever. Nope. There we go. A little Inktense blue and then a little black. And I'm just going to take a bit of blue, a bit of black, and then we'll grab a bit of our medium, thin it out. So you see I'm making you probably can't see, but here it is. So I'm making a really rich, kind of dark shade wash. And we're going to use this, and we're going to push this into our cracks and crevices. Oh, it's our Asgard to be pretty cool on the horseback. A little Aragon action. I like it. I like it. Okay. So now we're just going to take this darker color, and we're going to push it into those shadows, and we want a lot of contrast. Come around. And then same thing as we did on the pants with this wash. We kind of apply it to areas, and then if we want to kind of push it around or pull the translucency or transparency, we can do that as well. But the more contrast we put along those edges where that highlight is, the more gemmy and glinty it's going to wind up looking. So this is really just all comes down to kind of like your personal preference and how you want to see things, how shiny or bright you want your mini to be. I'll just kind of like tap that in right there. Maybe I'll grab a little bit of black and grab a little bit of blue. Just to add more contrast there. Come next to where the cape is and kind of come down. See that Got a little bit on my white, so I can just kind of like scrub most of that off. And like in the hair, right, we can come in and again hit those deeper areas. Maybe even come in with a little bit of black and really darken up those recesses in contrast. It's now gotten quiet because I'm in my thinky mode here. Because I'm just trying to consider where I want that contrast and those shadows to be, so that kind of get the effects that we're looking for. Here where it's kind of hard to get to the arm, I can also just come back in and push that wash wherever I feel like I need it. And that kind of saves my highlights there, but another really, if you're practice or you want to practice the technique, another really great approach to doing the gem or the diamond skin would be to look at non-metallic metals and effectively just do like a non-metallic metal approach where you get that high contrast against each other. So it's obviously similar. And kind of the idea, you know, gems are reflective, metals are reflective, so same technique, same overall idea of that, getting that contrast in and through. Is the cape optional? I mean, anything's optional when it comes to hobbying. I think you'd have to do a little bit of work. It's not designed to just be, you know, leave on, leave off, if that's the question, for sure. But you could leave it off. It slots in the shoulder, so there's some gap filling that you'd have to do for sure. But you could do it. I'm just going to come in. those higher features of the face. And then zing the hair. Pick our hair back out. Because we use pretty heavy wash there. Clean up. Here. Beep. 202. Oh my gosh. Well, luckily we're about done. At least with this part. So we got a couple of things left to do on her, but overall, I think we're sitting pretty good. So that's pretty much it for our diamond skin, I think. Once that wash dries, we can always go back through, do a couple more zing highlights maybe, depending on how everything dries out, just get that shine going. But for the most part, I'm very happy with where we wound up here. After 1 hour, we got our whites done, or at least based and highlighted. We need to go through and basically do some dark lining, do a couple of the symbols and everything, and then of course get that super sweet Inner Circle Hellfire Club base. But for the most part, a great amount of work done in 1 hour on this super sweet Emma Frost in diamond form. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to come back tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific, for Dallas Kemp, the professional in our two-part duo. I don't actually know what he's painting tomorrow, but it'll be pretty cool, I have no doubt. It'll be something Star Wars, I have zero doubt about. And of course, you can always join me back here next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. We've always got more stuff going on. Till next time, be good to each other, stay happy, play some games, and we will see you next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. And Dallas will see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific as well. Bye.